The Iceberg Hermit, Chapter 9. It took Alan several weeks to regain his former good spirits. Before the summer was over, he was to see land once again, though this time the berg never got any closer than 10 or 15 miles. In the meantime, Alan began to think of building a boat, or at least a raft. He emptied 8 barrels of their whale meat cargo, sealed the barrels again, and used oakum and hot tar to make them watertight. Then he ripped planking out of the forecastle until he had enough to nail into a rough platform. With a coil of rope, he lashed all 8 barrels together and tied the platform to the barrels, making himself a raft. Next he fashioned a long steering tiller out of a couple of planks, made a small mast from a harpoon lance, and sewed together a canvas sail to fit his square-rigged vessel. He kept the raft, its single sail furled, on top of the ice, firmly tied to the keel of the amphorbes. Several times he was tempted to load the raft with supplies and strike out, but then he realized that he might be weeks on the seas before he made land, and he did not want to be cast up on some desolate shore starving to death, and with no strength left to help himself. Anyway, he feared the raft would be of little use in high seas, or over long distances, though it would surely get him a few 100 yards to shore, or keep him alive for another couple of days if anything happened to the amphorbes and his ice island. During the summer, Alan had plenty of company. There was Nancy, who followed him wherever he went. She did not show any signs of missing her own kind or wanting to leave the iceberg, though Alan suspected that her feelings would change once she grew to full size. But in the meantime, she was good company, and Alan often held long conversations with her. Then too there was plenty of wildlife. He often saw seals sleeping on pans of ice. Small herds of walrus sometimes used the iceberg as a resting platform between dives to the sea floor after clams and other shellfish. Birds of all descriptions flew over and often landed briefly on his ice island. On several occasions Alan spotted the high feather of mist that came from a sounding whale, and once he even saw the long, twisting single horn of a narwhal. And so Alan and Nancy continued to drift through the polar seas for the rest of the summer. Actually, the iceberg was free of sea ice for only a month or so in late July and early August. Indeed, during an exceptionally cold summer, the sea ice sometimes did not break up at all. As the days grew shorter and the ice began to build out again from the edges of the berg, Alan kept a particularly sharp watch for passing sails. The whaling ships would soon be setting their sights on home. He now spent most of his time up in the ice cave, constantly searching the seas for that telltale patch of white that meant a sail. One day, while Alan was foraging for something on the amphorbes, he heard a sudden roaring, grinding noise that seemed to come from the iceberg tip. He was well used to the various sounds that the ice constantly made, the tinkling sounds of skim ice breaking up, like 1,000 drinking glasses shattering all at once, the occasional heavy and solid bump as a large ice floe hit the edge of the iceberg, the single sharp crack and heavy swoosh that accompanied a lifting motion under his feet as a section of the berg broke off to become what sailors called a growler. But this sound was different, like a constant roll of thunder far away. He hurried over to the ice mountain and climbed up to his cave. There below him, on the southern side of the berg, he found the answer. Hundreds of ice floes of all shapes and sizes were being driven up on the iceberg lip. They tumbled over one another, making hills and valleys as they gradually extended the size of the iceberg. The berg was starting to freeze in again for the winter, even though it was only mid-September as far as Alan could tell from the lengths of the days. And with that, Alan realized that the all-too-short Arctic summer was over. The whaling ships would now be setting sail for home, those that had not already left. His chances of being rescued by a ship were practically gone. He would have to spend another terrible winter in his ice prison. He had been a castaway now for a full year, and the thought of starting another year on the iceberg made him desperately unhappy. Yet 2 days later, having practically given up all hope of ever seeing another ship, he happened to look out over the water and spot a tiny triangle of white dancing on the horizon line to the east. Working as fast as he could, he got a fire going in the mouth of the cave and threw a couple of pounds of greasy oakum onto the coals. Soon thick black smoke was rising high above the iceberg. He climbed up above the cave, lowering the flagpole, and tied the captain's red shirt to the end of the lance, and hoisted the signal again. For several moments he watched the far-away white butterfly that seemed to have landed on the horizon line and folded shut its wings. Then he hurried down to the amphorbes, lit a fire in the cabin and piled more oakum on top. Soon another black column of smoke was climbing into the heavens. Once more he hurried back to his cave on the ice mountain. Why wasn't that ship heading about? She had to be a whaler, and because her course was probably set for home and the day was fair, she probably only had one masthead aloft. If she was still seeking whales, there would be 3 lookouts above on the masts. Alan sent prayer after prayer across the water to the masthead on the whaler. "Ah, now, lad, look this way," he silently begged the sailor. "Look, man, can't you see the signal? Do you not see the smoke? Yes, that's right, right over here. Now lean out over your rail and sing out, 'Smoke on the starboard bow, distress flag, cast away.'" But no matter how Alan prayed, that tiny triangle got smaller and smaller, until the sinking sun was so low that its rays blinded the whaler lookout from seeing anything to the west. "May you hit a berg and go straight to the bottom, you blind pig," Alan screamed, his bitterness after the departing ship. For a wild moment he was about to launch his raft until common sense convinced him that he could not possibly overtake the ship. He called Nancy and together they went back to the amphorbes. Alan added a few coals to the fire and put on some fish that Nancy had caught early in the day. After supper he had a smoke of his pipe and took out his Bible. He tried to read, but he could not get his mind off the whaler. With the wind crowding her sails, hurrying her home. "Aye, lass, we'll not see another ship for a good wee while, I'm thinking," he said aloud to his companion. When he turned around to look at Nancy, she was sitting on the floor, her back to the wall, her head sunk on her chest in her usual taking a nap position. She looked so comical that Alan had to laugh. Nancy heard his laugh and opened her eyes, and she screwed up her face and gave her special whinny. Alan laughed again, and Nancy imitated him. For the next 5 minutes, the cabin rang with Alan's laughter and Nancy's imitations. After that, Alan felt much better. He jumped to his feet and shook his fist at all the Arctic seas and lands. "You haven't got Alan Gordon yet," he cried out to his enemies. "Aye, not by a long shot. Do you hear me back there in Aberdeen? Do you hear me, master? Alan Gordon will be back." Nancy shuffled over, hooked her front paw around Alan's leg and suddenly tumbled him to the floor. Then she sat on his chest. "Aye," Alan said, "I'm a right fearsome terror when even a baby bear can best me." To which Nancy replied with a thorough licking of Alan's face while he tried to scramble out from under and get to his feet. That's the end of chapter 9. And good night and sleep tight.